He was a cold millionaire, surrounded by silence and dangerous memories. She, a virgin maid full of secret desires, until he found the diary she had forgotten in the mansion. What he read. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comment telling us where you are listening from. The fog crept up the hillsides like ghostly fingers, enshrouding the Blackwood mansion in a grey shroud that seemed never to fully dissipate. Even on the sunniest days in Virginia, the property maintained its melancholic air, as if the very stones absorbed the sadness accumulated over generations. Ethan Blackwood walked through the Italian marble corridors with steps that echoed in the emptiness, each sound bouncing off the high walls like a whispered lament. At 37, Ethan carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders and the emptiness of a shattered soul in his chest. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that seemed to harbor storms, he moved through the ancestral house like an elegant spectre, wearing impeccable suits that failed to disguise the desolation emanating from his every gesture. His black hair, always perfectly combed, contrasted with the paleness of someone who rarely saw sunlight. He was beautiful in a disturbing way, like a Greek statue cracked by pain. It had been 8 years since Claire died, and Ethan could still smell her perfume in the air whenever he passed by what had once been her room. Twin sister, confidante, the only person who truly understood him, Claire had been found floating in the ornamental lake in the gardens on a cold autumn morning, her long blonde hair spread in the water like golden algae. Suicide, the police had concluded. Ethan had never accepted this version, but he had never had the courage to investigate further. Some truths were too heavy to carry. Since then, something inside him had crystallized. He no longer touched anything living, not plants, not animals, much less people. His relationships were cold transactions, calculated encounters that ended before they even began. Human touch had become unbearable, as if it burned his skin. Ethan Blackwood, heir to one of the largest fortunes in the South, lived like a secular monk in his tower of ivory and marble. It was in this setting of luxury and desolation that Emma worked, moving through the rooms of the mansion with the lightness of someone who had learned to be invisible. At 23, she possessed a discreet beauty that went unnoticed at first glance, but grew in intensity for those who took the trouble to really look at her. Wavy brown hair that she always tied in a low bun, green eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets, fair skin that rarely received the kiss of the sun. Emma was too thin, as if life had forgotten to feed her properly, but there was a natural grace in her movements that made her seem like a ballerina gliding through the halls. An orphan since the age of 11, Emma had grown up in temporary homes after her mother's mysterious disappearance and her father's imprisonment for a crime she never fully understood. At 18, she had secured the job at the Blackwood mansion through an agency that provided domestic staff for wealthy families. It was a well-paying job for someone without academic training, and Emma had clung to the opportunity like a lifeline. What no one knew was that Emma harbored a secret that burned inside her. A virgin not by moral choice, but because of a deep trauma that prevented her from getting intimately close to any man, she channeled her desires and fears into small notebooks that she religiously wrote in every night. They weren't ordinary diaries. They were raw confessions, erotic fantasies mixed with reflections on pain and the need to belong. Emma wrote about the desire to be completely possessed, to surrender herself to someone strong enough to break through her defenses and rebuild her from scratch. In her secret pages, a man appeared constantly, tall, dark, powerful, with eyes that cut like blades. A man who would dominate her not only physically but emotionally, who would take her to the limits of pleasure and pain until she completely dissolved in his hands. Emma had never admitted, not even to herself, that this imaginary man had the face of Ethan Blackwood. For 5 years, she had observed her employer from a distance, cleaning his rooms when he wasn't there, serving meals he barely touched, being an efficient shadow in his ordered life. Ethan rarely spoke to her beyond basic instructions, but Emma felt the weight of his glances sometimes, as if he was studying her when he thought he wasn't being observed. These moments disturbed her, making her heart race and creating a strange sensation in her lower abdomen that she didn't know how to name. The storm arrived on a Friday in July, carried by howling winds that made the windows of the mansion tremble in their century-old wooden frames. Emma had finished her cleaning for the day and gone up to her small attic room when she realized she had forgotten one of her notebooks in the library. It was her most recent one, where she had been writing her most intense fantasies, and the idea of leaving it there all night filled her with panic. She descended the stairs silently, wearing only a white cotton nightgown and a thin robe, her bare feet sliding across the cold marble. The library was immersed in shadows, illuminated only by the intermittent flashes of lightning that streaked across the sky through the large windows. Emma searched for the notebook with a racing heart, imagining the mortal embarrassment if someone found it and read her most intimate confessions. That was when she heard heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. Ethan also couldn't sleep because of the storm, and had come to find a book to help him pass the sleepless night. Emma hid behind a tall bookshelf, praying he wouldn't discover her there, half naked and vulnerable. But when Ethan entered the library, his gaze went directly to the leather armchair where the small notebook, covered with floral fabric, lay forgotten on the floor. Emma watched in horror as he approached and picked up the notebook with those elegant hands she had so often imagined on her skin. Ethan opened to the first page and began to read, and even in the dim light she could see the change in his expression. His face hardened, the muscles in his jaw contracted, but he didn't stop reading. Page after page, absorbing every word, every fantasy, every desperate confession that Emma had poured onto the paper. Ethan remained in the library until dawn, reading and rereading every line of the notebook like a thirsty man who had finally found water. Emma's words burned in his mind with an intensity he hadn't felt in years. She wrote about him, not by name, but with such precise details that left no doubt. The way she described his hands, the exact color of his eyes when he was displeased, the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the way he adjusted his tie when thoughtful. Emma observed him, studied him, desired him with an intensity that left him simultaneously disturbed and excited. In the pages, handwritten in small, nervous script, Ethan discovered a universe of needs that strangely echoed his own emptiness. Emma wrote about loneliness, about the desire to completely belong to someone, about the need to be broken and rebuilt by firm and determined hands, but also about tenderness disguised as cruelty, about finding salvation in total surrender, about loving someone wounded enough to understand her own pain. What disturbed him most was recognizing in her fantasies an almost prophetic description of his own darkest desires. Ethan had always known there was something wrong with his sexuality, something that had crystallized after Claire's death. He could no longer touch or be touched without feeling a toxic mixture of guilt and excitement, as if any pleasure were a betrayal of his sister's memory. But Emma's words spoke of someone who understood this duality, who desired it, who could embrace it without judgment. When the sun rose through the heavy curtains of the library, Ethan stored the notebook in the locked drawer of his desk. He wouldn't return it, not yet. First, he needed to understand what it meant, what Emma really wanted from him. He went up to his quarters with his mind buzzing with possibilities he had long considered dead within himself. Emma came down to work that morning with deep shadows under her eyes and hands that trembled slightly. She had spent the entire night tossing and turning in bed, imagining Ethan reading her most intimate confessions, judging her, perhaps even firing her for her boldness. When she arrived at the library for the morning cleaning, she discreetly looked for the notebook, but it had disappeared. Panic invaded her like a cold wave. Over the following days, Ethan observed Emma with new and predatory attention. He had installed discreet security cameras in various rooms of the mansion years ago after some minor thefts, but had never used them to monitor the staff. Now he spent hours in his office watching Emma work, studying her every movement, every expression, looking for signs of what he had read in her writings. Emma cleaned with an unconscious grace that hypnotized him, the way she bent to reach high places, revealing the delicate curve of her neck, how she bit her lower lip when concentrating, how she whispered softly to herself while working. Ethan began to deliberately leave objects slightly out of place, just to see her correct them with that meticulous precision that so intrigued him. He also began to subtly modify his routine. He appeared in the rooms where she worked with flimsy excuses, retrieving a book, checking something, talking to the housekeeper about non-existent matters. Emma always lowered her eyes when he approached, but Ethan noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled almost imperceptibly. She knew something had changed between them. even without confirming her suspicions about the notebook. One particularly tense afternoon, while Emma organized books in the library, Ethan entered silently and positioned himself behind her. Emma sensed his presence before seeing him, the heat radiating from his body too close to be casual. When she turned, she almost bumped into his chest, and for the first time in 5 years, their eyes met directly for more than a few seconds. "Emma," said Ethan, his voice lower and hoarser than she had ever heard it. "Have you lost something recently?" Emma's blood seemed to freeze in her veins. She knew exactly what he was talking about, but a desperate part of her still hoped to be wrong. "No, sir, nothing important," she lied, her voice coming out weaker than intended. Ethan smiled, and there was something dangerous in that expression. "Interesting, because I found something I believe is yours. Something very revealing." He stepped back a few paces, but his eyes remained fixed on her like a predator studying its prey. "You write very well, Emma. You have a fascinating imagination." Emma's legs almost gave way. The blush rose up her neck like fire, and she had to lean against the bookshelf to keep from falling. I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, but they both knew it was a lie. "You don't need to pretend with me," said Ethan, his voice taking on a tone she recognized from her darkest fantasies. "I read every word, Emma, every fantasy, every confession, and I must admit I was impressed by your perception." Emma closed her eyes, wishing the earth would open up and swallow her. The humiliation was so intense it became physical, a sharp pain in her chest that prevented her from breathing properly. "Please," she murmured, "just fire me and forget what you read. I swear I'll never again fire you." Ethan chuckled softly, a sound that contained no humor at all. "That would be a terrible waste, especially when we discover we have compatible interests." He approached again, so close that Emma could smell his expensive cologne and something more primitive beneath it. "Tell me, Emma, how much of what you wrote was true? How much was just fantasy?" Emma opened her eyes and found his just inches away. There was something wild in that dark gaze, an intensity that reminded her of a hungry wolf. "I can't. It's too embarrassing," she stammered. Ethan extended his hand and lightly touched her chin, forcing her to look at him. It was their first physical contact in 5 years, and Emma felt an electric discharge run through her entire body. "Embarrassment is an interesting emotion," he murmured. "It can be transformed into something much more productive." His voice was hypnotic, dangerous. "I have a proposal for you, Emma, one that I believe you will find gut-stimulating." Emma knew she should run away, should refuse anything he was about to propose. But there was something in his voice, in his touch, that awakened exactly those dark needs she had poured onto paper for years. "What kind of proposal?" she asked, her own voice sounding strange and distant. Ethan smiled again, and this time there was something almost tender in the expression, mixed with the predation. "Patience, my dear Emma. Some things need to be savored slowly." He stepped back, leaving her trembling and confused. "Finish your work today. Tomorrow we'll have a more detailed conversation about your future here at the mansion." When Ethan left the library, Emma let herself slide down the bookshelf to the floor, her heart beating so hard that she feared it could be heard through the empty corridors. Her fantasies were becoming reality, and that terrified her as much as it excited her. That night, for the first time since she began working at the mansion, Emma couldn't write a single line in her spare notebook. Her mind was too occupied imagining what Ethan Blackwood had in mind for her. The following night seemed to drag like molasses. Emma had barely touched her dinner and spent hours looking at herself in the small mirror in her room, trying to imagine what Ethan saw when he looked at her. Her loose hair fell to her waist in brown waves that she rarely left free, and for the first time, she noticed how her green eyes seemed too large for her thin face. She wore a simple white cotton nightgown and a robe, not knowing exactly what to expect from the meeting he had suggested. At 10 o'clock, a soft knock echoed on her door. Emma opened it to find Ethan impeccably dressed even at that hour, with dark dress pants and a white shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. There was something predatory in his posture, but also a formality that confused her. "Come with me," he said simply, without explanations. Emma followed him through the silent corridors to a room she had never seen before, a private office adjacent to the library, with walls lined with dark leather and an imposing mahogany desk. A single lamp cast dramatic shadows across the space. creating an intimate and slightly threatening atmosphere. Ethan indicated a leather armchair for her to sit in, while he positioned himself behind the desk, creating a physical barrier between them that emphasized the power dynamic. Emma's floral notebook was open on the table, its pages exposed like evidence of uncommitted crimes. "Let's be direct," Ethan began, his voice formal but loaded with something darker. "I read your confessions, all of them, and I must admit that I found a level of honesty that I rarely see in the world I live in." He leaned forward, fingers interlaced. "You write about needs that most people wouldn't have the courage to admit even to themselves." Emma felt the blush rising up her neck again, but forced herself to meet his eyes. "They were just fantasies, sir. Ways of dealing with things I don't understand about myself." "Fantasies based on very precise observations," replied Ethan, a cold smile curving his lips. "You studied me, Emma, for years. You know my habits, my moods, even physical details that most people wouldn't notice." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And more importantly, you understand something about pain that few comprehend." Emma swallowed hard. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." Ethan stood up and walked to the window, hands behind his back, observing the dark gardens where Claire had died. "You write about finding beauty in total surrender, about the need to be broken in order to be rebuilt. That doesn't come from romantic fantasies, Emma. It comes from someone who knows pain intimately." He turned to her abruptly, and the intensity in his eyes made her instinctively recoil in the armchair. "You want to be possessed by someone who understands that pleasure and pain are sometimes the same thing. Someone who can take you to your limits and beyond, but who will also hold you when you fall apart." Ethan slowly approached, like a predator surrounding its prey. "Am I right?" Emma couldn't speak. Every word of his echoed her most secret thoughts, with a precision that left her vulnerable in a terrifying way. "I have a proposal," continued Ethan, stopping right in front of her. "An experiment, if you prefer to call it that. 1 month, Emma. 30 days in which you will surrender to me completely, physical, emotional, psychological. A contract where I can do with you everything I read in your pages, and you can discover if your fantasies correspond to reality." Emma's heart was beating so hard that she was sure he could hear it. I can't." "Yes, you can." Ethan knelt before her, placing his hands on the arms of the chair, imprisoning her without touching her. "Because you want to. Because you're 23 years old and have never been touched by a man the way you desire to be. Because you write about these needs every night, but you've never had the courage to explore them." Emma trembled when he came closer, his face just inches from hers. "And if I say no, then you'll continue to be my employee as you've always been, and we'll never mention this matter again." His voice was silky, hypnotic. "But you'll continue writing about fantasies. Continue touching yourself, thinking about things you'll never experience. Continue living a half-life." The casual cruelty of the observation hit her like a slap. Ethan knew exactly where to press to hurt her, but also to awaken her. "And if I accept?" "If you accept, you'll discover what it really means to belong to someone. Not just sexually, but in all aspects. I will control when you eat, when you sleep, what you wear, how you behave." His eyes darkened dangerously. "And in return, you will receive something you've never had. Someone who sees you completely, who accepts your darkest desires, who can give you exactly what you need." Emma closed her eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what he was proposing. "You're talking about using me as a toy." "I'm talking about liberating you," corrected Ethan, his voice gaining an almost hypnotic quality. "You're afraid of your own desire, Emma. Afraid of the intensity of what you feel, of the depth of what you want. With me, you won't need to be afraid. You can surrender completely because I will be in control." He moved back slightly, giving her space to breathe. "But don't think it will be easy. I am demanding, meticulous, and sometimes cruel. I will take you to places you may not know exist within yourself. There will be moments when you'll hate me, moments when you'll question your sanity for having accepted." Emma opened her eyes and met his. There was something wild in that gaze, but also a strange vulnerability that she hadn't expected. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, and she saw a shadow cross his face. "Because you wrote about me as if you knew me better than I know myself, and because, for a long time, I haven't felt anything when I touch or am touched. Your words made me feel something I thought was dead inside me. The brutal honesty of the confession surprised her. Emma realized that beneath all that formality and control, Ethan was as lost as she was, just in a different way. "If I accept," she said slowly, "what would the rules be?" Ethan smiled, and this time there was something almost tender in the expression. "Smart. Always negotiate the terms before signing a contract." He went back behind the desk and opened a drawer, removing several typed sheets of paper. "I have read this document several times since yesterday. It covers all aspects of our arrangement." Emma took the papers with trembling hands. The document was detailed and formal, almost like a business contract, but the content made her blush intensely. It specified limits, expectations, even safety clauses. It was clear that Ethan had thought of everything. "You have 24 hours to decide," he said, resuming his formal posture. "If you accept, sign on the last page and give it to me tomorrow night. If not, well, we'll continue as always." Emma folded the papers and pressed them against her chest. "And after the month, what happens?" Ethan observed her with an intensity that made her tremble. "That, my dear Emma, will depend entirely on how the next 30 days transform us." When Emma went up to her room that night, she knew her life was about to change irrevocably. The question was whether she would have enough courage to embrace this change, or would allow fear to keep her a prisoner of her own fantasies forever. Emma spent the night awake, obsessively rereading the contract by the weak light of her bedside lamp. Each clause was more disturbing and exciting than the previous one. Ethan had thought of details she had never considered, limits she didn't know needed to be established, situations that made her body react in ways that both embarrassed and intrigued her. The document specified schedules, expected behaviors, consequences for disobedience. There was a list of activities he considered acceptable and others that were prohibited. An entire section dedicated to her physical and emotional safety, with safety codes she could use if things went too far. It was meticulous, almost scientific in its approach to what should be something primitive and instinctive. But what disturbed her most was realizing that each item in the contract echoed something she had written in her diaries. Ethan wasn't creating arbitrary rules. He was offering a structured version of her own darkest fantasies. It was as if he had dived into the depths of her psyche and returned with a detailed map of her unconscious desires. When the sun rose, Emma was still sitting on the bed, the contract on her lap, a pen in her hand. She knew that if she signed that document, there would be no turning back. Ethan Blackwood was not the type of man who accepted half measures or regrets. If she gave herself to him, it would be completely without reservations, without the possibility of pretending she didn't know what she was getting into. During the day, she tried to maintain her normal work routine, but found herself stopping in the middle of simple tasks, lost in thoughts about what she would be doing in 24 hours if she signed the paper. Ethan appeared a few times, always with professional excuses, but his eyes followed her with a new intensity. He didn't ask about her decision, didn't pressure her, but his mere presence was a constant reminder of the choice she needed to make. In the afternoon, while organizing the pantry, Emma realized that her life until that moment had been a series of resignations. She had resigned herself to being an orphan, to not having a family, to working in silence, to accepting crumbs of attention and affection. She had resigned herself to being invisible, to living in the shadows, to transforming her deepest desires into secret fantasies she would never see fulfilled. Ethan was offering the opposite of that. He was offering intensity, total visibility, a chance to be seen and known in a way that terrified her. But he was also offering the possibility of becoming who she really was, instead of who she thought she should be. When the clock struck 10 at night, Emma descended the stairs with the signed contract, folded in her trembling hand. She didn't knock on the office door. She simply entered, knowing he was waiting for her. Ethan was standing by the window, observing the dark gardens. When she entered, he turned slowly, and the look he gave her was different from anything she had seen before. There was no longer the formality of the previous days, nor the professional distance he had always maintained. There was something primitive and possessive in his eyes that made her tremble. "Your decision?" he asked, though the paper in her hands was answer enough. Emma extended the contract without saying a word. Ethan approached and took the document, his fingers deliberately brushing against hers. The touch was electric, and Emma had to suppress a sigh. Ethan opened the paper and verified the signature, a slow smile curving his lips. "Emma Hill," he read aloud. A beautiful name for a woman who is about to discover things about herself she never imagined. He carefully folded the contract and stored it in the locked drawer of his desk. When he turned to her again, the entire atmosphere of the room had changed. They were no longer employer and employee discussing terms. They were predator and prey, dominator and submissive, two people about to embark on a journey that would transform them both forever. "First rule," said Ethan, his voice taking on a tone of command that she recognized from her fantasies. "When we are alone, you call me Ethan, not sir, not boss. Ethan, I need to hear my name on your lips." "Yes, Ethan," murmured Emma, and the name sounded strange and intimate in her mouth. "Second rule, when I am talking to you, look me in the eyes. Always. Don't lower your gaze out of shyness or shame. So I want to see every reaction, every emotion that passes across your face." Emma forced herself to raise her gaze and meet his. It was too intense, like looking directly at the sun, but she obliged herself to maintain eye contact. "Very good," murmured Ethan, slowly approaching. "Third rule, you no longer wear those tight buns. I want your hair loose whenever we're together. I want to be able to run my fingers through it whenever I want." Without warning, Ethan extended his hands and undid Emma's bun, letting her brown hair fall in waves to her waist. It was the first intimate touch between them, and Emma involuntarily closed her eyes as she felt his fingers sliding through her locks. "Open your eyes," he ordered softly. "Rule number 2, remember?" Emma obeyed and saw something that surprised her in Ethan's face. There was tenderness mixed with the possessiveness, as if he too was being affected by that contact in a way he hadn't expected. "You're more beautiful than I imagined," he murmured, his fingers still playing with her hair. "For 5 years you've hidden from me, made yourself invisible. That ends now. From today on, I want you to dress in a way that pleases me. Nothing vulgar, but also nothing that hides your beauty." Emma nodded, unable to form words. His proximity, the smell of his cologne, the heat of his body just inches away, everything conspired to make her dizzy and confused. "We have plenty of time to explore the more intense aspects of our agreement," said Ethan, stepping back slightly. "But tonight, I just want you to get used to the idea of belonging to me. I want you to sleep knowing that tomorrow your life will be different, that you are no longer just Emma, the invisible employee. Now you are mine in all the ways that implies." He walked to the desk and opened another drawer, removing a small box of black velvet. "Her gift to mark the beginning of her relationship." Emma opened the box with trembling fingers and found a delicate white gold necklace with a small, intricate key-shaped pendant. It was both beautiful and symbolically powerful, a key that represented access, possession, control. "You will wear this always," said Ethan, taking the necklace and positioning himself behind her. "It's a reminder that you belong to me now, but also that you have the power to open doors inside yourself that you've kept locked your entire life." When he fastened the clasp of the necklace on her neck, his hands brushed against her skin, and Emma felt a shiver run down her entire spine. The weight of the pendant against her collarbone was almost physically imperceptible, but emotionally, it was like carrying a chain made of promises and threats. "Now go," said Ethan, stepping back again. "Rest well, because tomorrow we begin your true education." "And Emma?" She turned as she reached the door. "Yes?" The smile he gave her was both promising and threatening. "Don't take off the necklace, ever. It's part of you now, just as I am." Emma went up to her room with her heart beating erratically, her fingers unconsciously caressing the golden pendant. She had crossed a line from which she could not return, and for the first time in a long time she felt truly alive. Terrified but alive. Emma woke before dawn, her fingers automatically going to the necklace at her throat. The small pendant was warm against her skin, as if it had absorbed the heat of her disturbing dreams. During the night, Ethan had invaded every moment of rest, appearing in fragments of images that left her restless and strangely hungry for something she couldn't name. She got up and looked at herself in the mirror, surprised by the woman she found reflected. Her loose hair framed her face in a way that made her appear more feminine, more vulnerable. The golden necklace caught the morning light filtering through the small window, and Emma realized that Ethan had chosen the perfect length. The pendant rested exactly in the space between her collarbones, drawing the eye to the neckline she had always kept hidden. When she went down to start work, she found a sealed envelope with her name on it on the small kitchen table. Inside, a firm and elegant handwriting that she immediately recognized. "Emma, from today on you will follow a new routine. First, you will have breakfast with me in the dining room at 7 in the morning. Second, you will wear only the dresses you will find in your closet. The old uniforms have been removed. Third, you will not speak to any other staff member about changes in your duties. This is a matter between the two of us, Ethan." Emma ran up to her room and opened the closet, finding 5 dresses that definitely weren't there the night before. They were elegant but simple, in shades of blue, green, and grey that complemented her fair skin and green eyes. Soft fabrics that followed the curves of her body without being vulgar. Lengths that reached her knees, discreet but feminine necklines. Ethan had studied her body with a precision that made her blush. She chose a navy blue dress and went down to the dining room at 7 o'clock sharp. Ethan was already there, impeccable in a dark grey suit, reading the newspaper while having coffee. When she entered, he raised his eyes and studied her for a moment that seemed eternal. "Perfect," he said simply, indicating the chair to his right. "Sit down. And remember the rules we established yesterday." Emma sat down and forced herself to look him in the eyes as he poured coffee into her cup. The simple act of having breakfast together seemed loaded with hidden meanings. Ethan ate slowly, methodically, and occasionally made casual observations about the weather or the gardens, as if they were an ordinary couple sharing their first meal of the day. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, and there was something in the way he spoke that suggested he knew exactly how restless her night had been. "Yes," lied Emma. "Thank you for asking. Ethan." His name still sounded strange on her lips, too intimate for what she thought they were. Ethan smiled slightly. "You'll get used to it. With time, you'll say my name in ways you can't even imagine yet." The implicit promise in the words made her shiver. After coffee, Ethan stood up and walked to where she was sitting. "Today you will work only in the ground floor rooms. I want to be able to see you when I pass through the corridors." He lightly touched her shoulder, an apparently casual contact that burned through the fabric of the dress. "And Emma, tonight you will dine with me. Wear the green dress." The day passed in a haze of anticipation and nervousness. Emma tried to maintain focus on her cleaning tasks, but found herself constantly stopping to touch the necklace or adjust the dress. Several times she saw Ethan observing her from a distance, always elegant and controlled, but with an intensity in his gaze that made her feel as if she were being visually devoured. In the afternoon, while polishing the silverware in the dining room, Ethan entered silently and positioned himself behind her. Emma felt his presence before seeing him, the heat radiating from his body too close to be accidental. "You're tense," he observed, his hands lightly landing on her shoulders. "Relax, I won't hurt you." The touch was firm but surprisingly gentle, and Emma found herself melting against those hands she had so often imagined on her skin. Ethan began to gently massage the tension accumulated in her muscles, and Emma involuntarily closed her eyes. "Rule number 2, he reminded her softly, and she immediately opened her eyes, finding his reflection in the ornate wall mirror. Seeing his face while he touched her was even more intense than feeling his hands. "You have a beautiful neck," murmured Ethan, his fingers sliding from her nape to the base of her throat, caressing the golden chain. "I've always wanted to touch it, but never allowed myself. Now I can." Emma trembled when he tilted his head and deposited a soft kiss just below her ear. It was her first kiss, and the sensation of his lips against her skin made her moan softly before she could control herself. Ethan smiled against her skin. "Did you like that?" When she nodded, unable to speak, he continued, "Then imagine what else I can do with you when we're ready." He stepped away then, leaving Emma dizzy and confused, her entire body vibrating with new sensations. "Continue your work," he said casually, as if he hadn't just completely revolutionized her world with a simple touch. Dinner was a delicious torture. Emma wore the green dress as instructed, and Ethan observed her with an appreciation that made her feel like a work of art being admired. They talked about trivial matters, books, music, the flowers in the garden. but every word seemed charged with sexual subtext. "Do you read much?" asked Ethan, elegantly cutting a piece of salmon. "When I can," replied Emma. "I like stories." "What kind of stories?" The question seemed innocent, but the smile on his lips suggested he knew exactly what kind of stories she preferred. Emma blushed. "Romances mainly." "Ah." Ethan took a sip of wine, his eyes never leaving her face. "And in these romances, what attracts you most?" "The happy endings." The question caught her off guard. Emma realized he was probing more deeply into her motivations, wanting to understand what moved her beyond physical desires. I like the idea of two people finding each other completely. To have someone who sees you exactly as you are and still stays." Something changed in Ethan's face, a shadow of vulnerability she rarely saw. "And do you believe that's possible? That someone can see all your flaws, all your fears, all your darkest needs, and still choose to stay?" The intensity of the question surprised her. "I hope so. Otherwise we spend our entire lives pretending to be who we aren't." Ethan was silent for a long moment, and Emma wondered if she had said something wrong. Then he extended his hand across the table and intertwined his fingers with hers. "You're wiser than you imagine," he said softly. "And braver. Most people prefer the comfortable lie to the disturbing truth." When they finished dinner, Ethan accompanied her to the foot of the stairs. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will begin to explore other aspects of our agreement. Do you feel ready?" Emma knew she should be afraid, but all she felt was an anticipation that burned inside her. "Yes," she whispered. Ethan smiled and leaned in to kiss her forehead, a surprisingly tender gesture. "Good night, Emma. Dream of me." As she climbed the stairs, Emma knew she wouldn't need instructions to dream of Ethan. He had already become the center of her orbit, the gravitational force that completely reorganized her universe. And she discovered, to her own surprise, that she didn't want to resist this attraction. She wanted to let herself be pulled in, even not knowing where this fall would lead her. The second week brought changes that Emma had never anticipated. Ethan began to appear at unexpected moments, while she folded clothes in the laundry room, when she organized books in the library, even when she prepared tea in the kitchen. These weren't casual encounters. They were clearly planned, as if he were mapping her movements and choosing the exact moments to intercept her. On a particularly cold morning, Emma was arranging flowers in the entrance hall when she felt firm hands on her waist. Ethan positioned himself behind her, so close that she could feel the heat of his chest against her back. "You have delicate hands," he murmured, observing how she adjusted the white roses in the crystal vase. "I've always noticed how you touch things with care, as if they were precious." Emma stood motionless, barely breathing. "I learned to be careful with things that don't belong to me," she whispered. Ethan slid a hand up her arm until he reached her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers over one of the flowers. "And if I told you that now you belong to me and I belong to you, would it change how you touch me?" The question caught her off guard. She had spent the last few days thinking of the contract as something unilateral, her surrendering to him. The idea that he might also be surrendering to her was both disturbing and exciting. "I don't know," she admitted, slowly turning in his arms. It was the first time they had been so close, face to face, and the intensity in his eyes almost made her lose her balance. "Then perhaps it's time to find out," said Ethan, his hands rising to frame her face. "You can touch me, Emma. In fact, I want you to touch me." With a hesitation that surprised her in herself, Emma raised her hands and placed them on his chest, feeling the soft fabric of his shirt and the warmth of the skin beneath. Ethan's heart was beating strong and fast, and she realized he was as affected as she was by their proximity. "Like this," he murmured, covering her hands with his. "Don't be afraid to feel me." Emma let her hands explore timidly, sliding over his broad shoulders, over his neck where she could see a vein pulsing rapidly. When her fingers brushed the line of his jaw, Ethan closed his eyes and sighed softly, a reaction so visceral that she felt powerful in a completely new way. "Ethan," she whispered, experimenting with saying his name in a more intimate way. He opened his eyes, and the intensity she found there almost made her step back. "Say it again," he asked, his voice hoarse. "Ethan." This time she said it with more confidence, and saw how the name affected him physically, an almost imperceptible tremor passing through his body. "You have no idea what you do to me," he murmured, leaning his forehead to touch hers. "For 5 years I've observed you from afar, imagining what it would be like to hear my name on your lips. The reality is much more intense than any fantasy." The confession surprised her. "You thought about me?" Ethan laughed softly, a sound without much humor. "I thought about you more than I should." More than was appropriate. "You walked through this house like a ghost, so quiet and careful, and I would imagine what would happen if I touched you, if I could make you see yourself the way I see you." "How do you see me?" asked Emma, genuinely curious. Ethan hesitated, as if the question were more difficult to answer than she imagined. "As someone who hides incredible strength behind all that delicacy. As a woman who could save me if I let her." His voice became lower, more vulnerable. "And as the only person who could understand that sometimes destruction and creation are the same thing." The emotional intensity of the moment was broken by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Ethan immediately stepped back, the mask of composure returning to its place as if it had never left. When the housekeeper appeared, he was examining the flowers with purely aesthetic interest. "Good job with the arrangement, Emma," he said formally. "The roses are particularly beautiful today." But when the housekeeper passed, Ethan leaned in and whispered in her ear, "Tonight after dinner, come to my office. It's time to advance to the next stage of our agreement." The rest of the day passed in a fog of anticipation and nervousness. Emma could barely concentrate on her tasks, her mind constantly returning to the implicit promise in Ethan's words. During dinner, he was attentive but controlled, conversing about neutral topics, while his eyes promised things that made her blush. When she finally knocked on the office door at 10 o'clock that night, Emma was wearing the blue dress that had become her favorite, her hair loose as he liked it, the golden necklace catching the soft light of the lamp. "Come in," said Ethan, and when she obeyed, she found the environment slightly different. The curtains were closed, creating greater intimacy, and there was classical music playing softly, something melancholic and beautiful that she didn't recognize. Ethan was standing in front of the fireplace, without his jacket, just shirt and pants. He seemed more relaxed than she had ever seen him. But there was an underlying tension that made her feel as if they were on the verge of something irreversible. "Sit down," he said, indicating the leather sofa in front of the fireplace, instead of the formal chair she usually occupied. Emma sat down, trying not to appear as nervous as she felt. Ethan joined her but kept a small distance, respecting her personal space while establishing his presence. "I want to talk about limits," he began, his voice softer than usual. "About what you want to experience and what frightens you too much to try." Emma felt the blush rising up her neck. "I wrote about many things that perhaps were just fantasies." "Perhaps," agreed Ethan, "but some fantasies exist because they represent real needs that we don't know how to express in other ways." He leaned slightly toward her. "Tell me about your first kiss." The question caught her off guard. "I never?" Ethan seemed genuinely surprised. "Emma, you're 23 years old. I never found anyone who made me want to," she admitted, her voice almost inaudible. "And after a while it became harder to admit that I didn't know how." Ethan was silent for a moment, processing the information. When he spoke again, his voice had a different quality, more protective. "So when I kissed you on the neck the other day, it was the first time anyone had kissed me," confirmed Emma, unable to look him in the eyes. Ethan extended his hand and gently raised her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Emma, look at me." When she obeyed, he continued, "There is no shame in that. In fact, there is something beautiful about being the first person to awaken these sensations in you." He moved closer, his hands framing her face. "May I give you your first real kiss? On your lips?" Emma nodded, unable to speak. Ethan leaned in slowly, giving her time to back away if she wanted to, but she remained motionless, eyes closed, waiting. When his lips touched hers, it was too gentle to be called a kiss. More like a promise, a whisper of contact that made her tremble. Ethan pulled back slightly, studying her reaction. "How did that feel?" he asked softly. "Like I wanted more," admitted Emma, surprising herself with her own honesty. Ethan smiled, and this time when he kissed her, it was with more pressure, more intention. Emma found herself melting against him, her hands clutching his shirt like an anchor. The kiss deepened gradually, Ethan guiding her through sensations that made her feel as if she were discovering an entirely new language. When they finally separated, they were both breathing heavily. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his eyes still closed. "Emma," he murmured, "you're going to be my undoing." The following days brought a subtle but noticeable change in the dynamics between Ethan and Emma. There was a new tension in the air, loaded with unfulfilled promises and desires that grew with each furtive glance. Ethan had become more possessive, appearing in the rooms where she worked with even greater frequency, always finding excuses to touch her, a brush of fingers when passing a document, a hand at the small of her back when guiding her through a door. Seemingly casual caresses that left her trembling and confused. Emma, in turn, found herself observing Ethan with new attention. She studied the way he moved through the corridors with that feline elegance, how his eyes darkened when he looked at her, how his hands always seemed to be seeking a reason to touch her. She began to understand that the power in their relationship wasn't as unilateral as the contract suggested. She also exerted an influence over him that seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. On a particularly quiet afternoon, while organizing old papers in the library, Emma found something that made her stop abruptly. Among dusty documents about the family property, there was a folder with old photos. Most showed Ethan and a young blonde woman who could only be Claire. Twin siblings so alike it was almost disturbing. But it was a specific photo that left her frozen. Claire at 15, standing in front of the lake where she would later be found dead, but she wasn't alone. There was a younger girl beside her, too thin, with large green eyes and disheveled brown hair. A girl that Emma recognized as herself. With trembling hands, she studied the photograph. She had no memory whatsoever of that moment, that place, that time in her life. All she remembered from age 11 was a fog of pain and confusion after her mother's disappearance. But there she was, clearly on the grounds of the Blackwood mansion, beside Ethan's sister. "Found something interesting." Ethan's voice behind her made her jump, almost dropping the folder. Emma turned quickly, trying to hide the photo, but Ethan was faster. His eyes went straight to the image in her hands, and Emma saw something change in his expression, a mixture of surprise and something darker that she couldn't identify. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice strangely controlled. "It was here among the old papers," said Emma, reluctantly extending the photo. "Ethan, is that me? With Claire?" Ethan took the photograph and studied it for a long moment, his jaw contracting. "Yes," he said finally. "It's you. And Claire." He raised his eyes to her, and there was something haunted in that look. "You don't remember having been here before?" Emma slowly shook her head. "No, I mean, maybe. There are fragments, blurred images, but I thought they were dreams or nightmares." She hesitated. "Ethan, what was I doing here? Why don't I remember?" Ethan walked to the window, still holding the photo, his gaze lost in the dark gardens. "You appeared here one stormy night alone, soaked, saying you were looking for your mother. Claire found you wandering through the gardens and brought you inside." His voice became lower, more distant. "You stayed for 3 days. Claire became obsessed with caring for you, as if you were a broken doll she could fix." Emma slowly approached, her heart beating erratically. "And then what happened after?" "Social services came to get you," said Ethan, but there was something in his voice that suggested he wasn't telling the whole truth. "You were taken to a temporary home. Claire was inconsolable for weeks." He turned to her, and Emma saw genuine pain in his eyes. "She talked about you constantly, said you were kindred spirits, that you had the same sadness in your eyes." The revelation hit Emma like a punch to the stomach. "The night before she died." "Was that when I left?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Claire died the morning after your departure. For years I wondered if there was a connection, if your disappearance had contributed to her mental state that final night." Emma felt as if the floor were moving beneath her feet. "You think that somehow I caused—" "No." Ethan approached and firmly held her shoulders. "Don't say that. Claire had been sick for a long time, Emma. Deep depression, suicidal ideation that she hid from everyone. Your presence here were the only 3 days in months that I saw her genuinely happy." But Emma saw something else in his eyes, something he wasn't saying. A shadow of doubt, perhaps even resentment that he struggled to suppress. "Ethan," she said softly, "why did you hire me? 5 years ago, when I appeared looking for work, did you recognize me?" Ethan hesitated, and Emma saw the exact moment when he decided to lie. "No," he said. "I only made the connection now, seeing the photo." Emma knew it was a lie. She could see it in the way he avoided her eyes, in the tension in his shoulders. Ethan had recognized her from the first day, and yet he had kept her close. The question was, why? "May I keep the photo?" she asked. Ethan observed her for a long moment before handing it over. "Of course. But Emma, sometimes the past is better left where it is. Not all the answers we seek bring us peace." That night Emma couldn't sleep. She lay looking at the photograph in the weak light of the bedside lamp, trying to force memories that seemed to be blocked by some psychological barrier. Fragments began to emerge, the sound of heavy rain, a female voice whispering words of comfort, the smell of roses and something else. Fear. There was fear in those fragmented memories. She got up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens bathed in moonlight. The lake was visible from there, a dark stain surrounded by willows swaying in the night breeze. Something about that view deeply disturbed her, as if she were looking at the scene of a crime she had witnessed but couldn't remember. The next morning, Ethan was different. More distant, more formal, as if the discovery of the photo had created a barrier between them. During breakfast, he barely looked at her, focusing entirely on the newspaper. Emma felt as if she had lost something precious without understanding exactly what. "Ethan," she said finally, unable to bear the silence. "About yesterday." "Forget yesterday," he said abruptly, without raising his eyes from the newspaper. "Sometimes it's better to leave the dead past where it is." The coldness in his voice hit her like a slap. Emma realized that the discovery of her connection to Claire had changed something fundamental between them. Ethan was no longer seeing her just as Emma, the woman who wrote erotic fantasies about him. Now she was Emma, the girl who might have contributed to the death of his twin sister. But Emma also had questions. How was it possible that she didn't remember 3 entire days of her life? Why had Ethan kept her close if he associated her with the most painful loss he had suffered? And most importantly, what had really happened on that last night before Claire was found dead in the lake? That afternoon, while Ethan was in business meetings in the city, Emma made a decision she knew was dangerous. She went down to the basement of the mansion, a place where she had never dared to go before, in search of more answers about those 3 lost days. The basement was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and dusty rooms full of old furniture and boxes of documents. Emma searched methodically, following an instinct she couldn't explain. It was in a room at the back, behind a pile of paintings covered by sheets, that she found what she was looking for without knowing she was looking for it. A small wooden chest, locked but with the key still in the lock. Inside, dozens of notebooks, all with the delicate handwriting she recognized from the photos as being Claire's. Intimate diaries dating from the last 2 years of the young woman's life. Emma opened one of the notebooks in the middle and began to read, looking for any mention of herself. It didn't take long to find when the girl came back today. She didn't recognize me, but I recognized her immediately. The same haunted green eyes, the same sadness she carries like a burden. She has grown up and become pretty, but there's still something broken in her that makes me want to protect her. Ethan doesn't know that I know who she is. He thinks he can fool me, that I don't notice how he observes her. But I see everything, and I know she is the key to understanding what really happened on that terrible night, so many years ago. Emma felt her blood freeze in her veins. Claire knew. She knew that Ethan had recognized her, knew there was something about that night that needed to be discovered. But what could have happened involving an 11-year-old child that was important enough for Claire to mention in her last days of life? With trembling hands, Emma continued reading, knowing she was about to discover truths that might change everything between her and Ethan forever. Emma continued reading Claire's diaries with a growing mixture of fascination and horror. Each page revealed a deeply troubled young woman, obsessed not only with her own pain, but with the idea that Emma held secrets about events she couldn't even remember. The entries from the last months of Claire's life were particularly distressing. Ethan thinks I don't see how he watches her, but twin siblings sense things that others can't perceive. There's something sexual in the way he looks at her, something that disturbs him because she's too young, because she represents something from our past that he wants to forget. But she's not a child anymore. She's a woman, and I see how she looks at him too, even without understanding what she feels. Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. Claire had perceived the attraction between her and Ethan 5 years ago, when Emma barely understood her own feelings. She turned a few pages and found an entry that made her stop breathing. I talked to Dad today about that night. He finally admitted the truth about the girl's mother. Mary Hill didn't disappear as everyone thinks. She was killed here on this property because she discovered family secrets that Dad couldn't allow to be revealed. The girl saw everything. That's why she appeared here that night. She was running from whoever killed her mother. And God forgive me, I knew. I always knew that Dad was capable of terrible things, but I never imagined he would go as far as killing an innocent woman to protect his dirty business. Emma let the diary fall from her trembling hands. Her mother had been murdered, here on this property, and she had witnessed everything, being just an 11-year-old child too traumatized to form coherent memories of the event. She forced herself to continue reading, looking for more details. The girl doesn't remember because her mind blocked the trauma, but sometimes when she slept here with us, she would talk during nightmares. She would say things about blood, about screams, about men in suits who looked like monsters. Ethan and I knew she was reliving something terrible, but Dad forbade us from investigating further. He said some truths were too dangerous to be unearthed. Emma stood up abruptly, her heart beating so hard it hurt. Everything was beginning to make sense in a sick way. Ethan hadn't hired her by chance, nor even simply because he recognized her. He had kept her close because she was a witness to a crime that his family had committed. She continued searching through the diaries until she found the final entry, written on the eve of Claire's death. I can no longer live with this weight. The guilt is slowly killing me. Emma doesn't know the truth about her mother, and Ethan plans to keep things that way forever. But she deserves to know. She deserves justice. I've decided to tell her everything tomorrow, when Dad travels to Richmond. I'm going to show her where her mother's body is buried. I'm going to hand over the documents that prove our family's involvement in the murder. And if Ethan or Dad try to stop me, well, maybe it's better if I follow the path of the water, as I've always dreamed. The lake has always called to me. Perhaps it's my destiny to find peace in the depths. Emma felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Claire hadn't committed suicide because of depression. She had been murdered to silence her, before she could reveal the truth about Mary Hill's murder. And Ethan. Ethan knew everything. With trembling hands, she put the diaries back in the chest and climbed up from the basement on legs that barely supported her. Her mind was buzzing with questions and a rage that grew with each second. Ethan had slept with her, had kissed her, had made her believe he cared about her, all the while knowing that his family had irreparably destroyed her life. When Ethan arrived home that night, he found Emma waiting for him in the entrance hall. She was pale, but there was something different in her posture, a firmness he had never seen before. "We need to talk," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Ethan studied her for a moment, and Emma saw the exact moment when he realized something had fundamentally changed. About what? About Mary Hill, about Claire, about the truth you've been hiding from me for 5 years. Ethan's face closed completely. "Emma, I don't know what you're talking about." "Stop lying," she exploded, all the accumulated pain and anger overflowing at once. "I read Claire's diaries. I know my mother was murdered here. I know you kept me close because I'm a witness to a crime your family committed." Ethan closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them again, all pretense had disappeared. "How did you find them?" "Does it matter?" Emma took a step toward him, trembling with rage. "What matters is that you lied to me about everything. You seduced me, made me believe you cared about me, when in reality I'm just a threat you need to control." "That's not true," said Ethan, trying to approach, but Emma backed away. "Isn't it? Then tell me the truth now. About my mother, about Claire, about why you really want me around." Ethan ran his hands through his hair, a mask of composure finally crumbling. "Your mother worked for my father. She was an accountant, discovered he was laundering money from drug trafficking through the family businesses. When she threatened to expose everything—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "He killed her," completed Emma, her voice coming out as a whisper. "Yes. And you saw it. You were hiding in the office when it happened. Afterward, you went into shock, ran out into the rain, Claire found you in the gardens hours later, wet and delirious. Emma felt hot tears running down her face. And Claire? Did she really commit suicide? Ethan hesitated, and Emma saw the truth in his eyes before he spoke. She was planning to tell you everything. My father. I hate to be Martin Todt. Couldn't allow that. He killed her too, said Emma, not as a question but as a statement. Ethan nodded, the weight of guilt visible in every line of his face. He pushed her into the lake during an argument. Then he forged evidence of suicide. I was traveling, only found out when I returned and she was already dead. And you covered it all up. Let everyone believe she killed herself. And I was 17, Emma. I was a minor, I was terrified. And my father threatened to kill you too if I opened my mouth, Ethan shouted, his composure finally shattering. You think it was easy to live with this for all these years? You think I wanted you to show up here, constantly reminding me of what my family did? Emma paused, processing his words. Then why did you hire me? Why didn't you just send me away? Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and Emma saw something break inside him. Because from the moment you left this house at 11 years old, I couldn't stop thinking about you. Because Claire was right. You and I are wounded souls, and in some sick way we belong to each other. His voice became lower, more desperate. And because I knew that one day you would want answers, and when that day came I wanted to be close enough to protect you. Protect me? Emma laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You have a very strange form of protection, Ethan. Making me fall in love with you, making me trust you, all while hiding that you know who killed my mother. I didn't make you fall in love with me, said Ethan softly. That happened naturally, just as I fell in love with you. And yes, I hide the identity of your mother's murderer, because he is my father, and because even being a monster, he's still the only family I have left. Emma stared at him, finally seeing the full extent of the tragedy that connected their lives. Ethan was both victim and accomplice, trapped between the love he felt for her and the terrible loyalty he owed to the man who had destroyed everything she loved. Where is he now? She asked, her voice dangerously calm. Emma, no. Where is your father, Ethan? Ethan observed her for a long moment, recognizing something implacable in her eyes. At the farm in Oak Ridge. But Emma, please don't do anything rash. Let me find a way to... But Emma was already climbing the stairs, her mind working frantically. She had found the answers she was looking for, but now she needed to decide what to do with them. And one thing was certain. She could no longer pretend to love Ethan without consequences. Their love had been born of lies and was rooted in blood. The question was whether it would be strong enough to survive the truth. Emma didn't sleep that night. She sat on the bed, looking out the window at the gardens where her mother had been murdered, where Claire had met her death for wanting to do justice. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold anger she had never felt before. Ethan had knocked on her door several times during the night, begging her to let him in, to talk, but Emma remained silent. She needed to process everything alone, to decide her next step without the influence of those dark eyes that could make her temporarily forget her pain. When the sun rose, Emma made a decision she knew was dangerous but necessary. She went down to the kitchen and prepared coffee as she always did, but this time she also prepared a small bag with some of her clothes and all her notebooks. There was something she needed to do before leaving this house forever, the house that had been both her refuge and her prison. Ethan found her in the library at 7 in the morning, and Emma immediately saw that he hadn't slept either. His clothes were rumpled, his hair disheveled, his eyes red and desperate. When he saw her arranging books with mechanical movements, he approached slowly, as if she were a wounded animal that might flee at the slightest sudden movement. Emma, he said softly, please let me explain better. Let me find a way to make things right. Emma continued arranging the books without looking at him. There is no way to make things right, Ethan. My mother is dead, Claire is dead, and your father is free, living comfortably on a farm while I spent 12 years believing I was an orphan by chance of fate. He's not free, said Ethan, and there was something different in his voice. Not really. He lives haunted by what he did, Ethan. He drinks too much, has nightmares, can barely look me in the eyes without seeing guilt reflected back. Good, said Emma with a coldness that surprised her. I hope he suffers for every day that remains of his miserable life. It was at that moment that she heard the sound of a car approaching. Through the window, she saw Ethan descending from a black Mercedes. his face pale but determined. Emma felt a mixture of irritation and something dangerously close to relief at seeing him. Ethan entered the house without ceremony, his eyes immediately going to Emma before turning to his father, with an expression she had never seen before. Pure, undisguised hatred. "Father," he said, his voice loaded with contempt. "The time has come to pay for your crimes." Edward looked at his son with desperation. "Ethan, you don't understand. It was all an accident. I never wanted—" "Lie," cut in Ethan, taking a small digital recorder from his pocket. "I just recorded your entire confession. And before I arrived here, I handed copies of all the documents that Claire had hidden to the FBI, along with Dr. Stanley's complete statement." Emma looked at Ethan with surprise. Dr. Stanley confessed? "He had been waiting for 20 years for someone with enough courage to expose the truth," said Ethan, his eyes never leaving his father's face. "When I appeared at his door with evidence and promised to protect him in exchange for his testimony, he told everything about the falsified death certificates, about helping to hide the bodies, about the network of corruption that my father built." Edward stood up, staggering. "You betrayed your own family, betrayed your own blood." "No," said Ethan with a terrible calm. "I chose to protect the woman I love instead of protecting a murderer who happens to share my DNA." He turned to Emma, and she saw genuine vulnerability in his eyes. "I know it may be too late for your forgiveness, Emma. I know I may have lost any chance of a future with you, but I couldn't let you face this alone." Emma felt something unravel in her chest, a wall of pain and distrust that she had built in the last few days. "Ethan!" The sound of sirens interrupted the moment. FBI cars surrounded the property, and Emma watched as Edward Blackwood was arrested for the murders of Mary Hill and Claire Blackwood. 20 years of lies and secrets finally came to light under the merciless light of justice. When the officers finally departed, taking Edward away in handcuffs, Emma and Ethan stood alone on the porch of the farm, watching the sun set over the golden fields. The silence between them was loaded with everything that had been lost and everything that might still be saved. "Why did you do this?" asked Emma finally. "Why did you betray your family for me?" Ethan turned to her, and Emma saw tears in his eyes. "Because I finally understood what Claire was trying to teach me before she died. That true love isn't possession or control. It's choosing to do what's right even when it costs everything you have." He hesitated. "And because you were right about us. Our love couldn't grow in soil contaminated with blood and lies. We needed to clean everything up first." Emma approached him slowly. "And now, what happens now that the truth has come out?" Ethan extended his hand but didn't touch her, respecting her space. "Now you decide if there's still something between us worth saving. If you can forgive me for having taken so long to make the right choice." Emma looked at this man who had been so many things to her: employer, dominator, mentor, lover, betrayer, and finally, redeemer. She saw in his emotional scars a reflection of her own wounds and understood that perhaps healing was only possible if it came together. "Ethan," she said softly, "you were right about one thing. Sometimes destruction and creation are the same thing." She touched his face, feeling him tremble under her palm. "We destroyed who we were, you the loyal son, me the lost orphan. Now we can create something new." When Ethan kissed her under the starry sky of Oak Ridge, it was different from all the kisses they had shared before. There were no more lies between them, no secrets, no inherited guilt. There were only two wounded hearts that had found in each other the possibility of healing. 3 months later, Emma returned to the Blackwood mansion for the first time since she had left. But now it was no longer as an employee or secret lover. It was as the woman Ethan loved and respected completely, who had chosen to build a future with him based on truth and redemption. Together, they transformed the property into a support center for victims of domestic violence, funded by the family fortune, a way to use the blood-stained money to heal other wounds. The lake where Claire had died was transformed into a memorial garden, where 2 plaques honored Mary Hill and Claire Blackwood, brave women who died defending the truth. On the night of their wedding, held in the restored gardens of the mansion, Emma wore the gold necklace that Ethan had given her so long ago. But now the small key meant something different, not possession or control, but the promise that they would both always keep the doors of their hearts open to each other. As they danced beneath the stars, Ethan whispered in her ear, "You taught me that true love isn't about possessing someone. It's about choosing that person every day, even when it's difficult. Emma smiled, finally at peace with the past and hopeful about the future. And you taught me that we deserve to be loved exactly